So for week 10 of this week, we had to read the intro, chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 5 for the focus, and then chose to read the rest of the book of Debility and Moral Imagination in Botswana by Julie Livingston. So I'm going to outline the ones we were required to read, and then when you choose to read the rest, if you do, please keep in mind the same question patterning while you do this. So we're going to start off with the intro. So when looking at the intro, we see that, like with many cultures, you see differences of experiences, thought processes, and symbolism across many cultures. Human beings have many different cultures, many different thought processes due to our imagination, creativity, life, environment, many different factors. So one of the main things I want you to keep in mind is experiencing history inside your body, seeing the changes of the world through the way you're treated. Also, long-lasting effects from colonialism and the neglect that ensues. So how did the British being in this area affect the people of Botswana? Also, history of the present. What does this mean to you? Keep this question in mind throughout the entire reading. And then key points to focus on throughout the reading is social change and suffering and how they interact. So how does the suffering of the people of Botswana and the change from British colonialism, post-colonialism time, and pre-colonialism time all change with the impacts of disease and everything else that's going on? There's multiple pieces of being disabled too, and the introduction goes into that, so pay attention to what they're talking about. There's people's experiences, the history of the land, and then there's also many different body differences. Some people work in the field and having a broken foot means way more, but if you're in the house, not so much. Life-altering effects of disability, not seen as livable. So look at the case of Bantle, see how that affects her life and the choices she makes. But would that be the case in other countries? Interesting thought process. And then humans' bodies' needs versus conflicts and social. Also look at Bantle again. Which ones tend to win out in the end? Do the body's need for this medical treatment, this doctor, this healthcare resource like a wheelchair outdo their social needs? So if they need this husband or this family, but in order to have that, they have to give up something else, which one would they end up choosing in the end? And I think that's an important question when looking at one's self and culture. Different definitions of soul and body. So that comes back to culture. Some cultures are you're bound to your body and your soul is your body, while others have souls that move within and out of the body. The effects of feeling of self and other selves. So when looking at being disabled, do you see yourself being only impacted by yourself, or the way you treat others being other impactfulness? They discuss that, so pay attention to that. Why is illness and debility such a mental struggle worldwide, and what could be done to get past the lack of data from earlier times are two questions you want to answer. Overlapping meanings of Bogle and Sickle, so pay attention to what they're defined as and how different areas define them differently. Why a rewriting of kinship? Why do people rewrite their kinship when people become disabled? Pay attention to that. Try to question that yourself. Would that happen to you in this culture, and how it differs? When Western countries got involved in eugenics and disability, what effect did that have when it was brought during the colonial times? Eugenics is based in very racist thought processes too, so keep that in mind. There's a lot of thought process behind how white was the superior race, so therefore there must be something biologically and genetically wrong and physically wrong with the other races, and that can be studied. And that left people distrustful. Special effects in myths, don't look at them ideal, so that goes back to eugenics. And then changing in mining laws and how that affects the ideal of ableness, and that will be reflected back in chapter 5 and 3, I believe, which is the physical exams. And then again, we go back into the effects of ableness on income, which goes back to the mining laws. If you can't work, how can you make money? How can you have a life? The tensions of public health will go into more depth in chapter 3 and 5, where you're talking about the crossover between political and medical terms, and how there's a lot of distrust for modern medicine and the political systems, which goes back to eugenics again. So pay attention to how that all intersects. And does this lead to a distrust or more trust for traditional use of medicine? And what can be done to heal this disconnect / repair the trust so that this country can progress? Importance of The video cut me off, so we're going to cut back at the beginning of the intro. So what can be done to heal this connected core pet, and the importance of imagination, roles, and religion. How these points lead to increased thought processes and invisibility within the points. So do they want to be visible? Do they not want to be more visible in the context? It depends on who they are. Do they want to have a more masculine presence, more feminine presence? Pay attention to what they're talking about. And then multiple sources and resources. Why is this important? Is it important when discussing disability in the sector of life? When looking at chapter 2, we want to reflect on the intro and how the land is laid out. So for the first 3 paragraphs, they discuss how Botswana is laid out, how there's farmland, agriculture, and how the town is laid out. So you want to look at how this unforgiving land has affected the mindset of the people. And is it really unforgiving land, or is that just a Western idea being reflected onto these people? Then you also want to look at life based on the environment. How did they adapt to their land? How they get everything from the bush. They get their medicine, they get their food, they get their housing. Everything comes from the land. So how would globalization and colonization impact this? Which is important to think about when you're reading. Understand the spatial domains and what illnesses and injuries could result as of this separation. So you have men out in the field. What injuries are more likely from being out in the field? Well, you have women working at the house instead. Importance of symbolism in their life. Functionality of the home and separation of the sleeping place. So you have the children who have their own separate house that they sleep in, and then you have the wives caring for that house on their own. And then you have the societal formation of those houses being representative of them as a person. So if the house isn't tidy and the front doesn't look right, there's no weeds, then there's gossip and they're not considered a good person or a clean person based on how their house looks. So how does that impact behavior? Seasons bring important changes and affect the health. How does this reaffirm superstition? So if a shaman predicts something and the chief predicts something and it happens, how does this all impact the culture further? Gender roles and importance of hierarchy. This is a whole chapter. So just pay attention to the roles of the chief and its impact and why it's only in men, and then the role of the woman within the chief and how there's slavery within their society and everything like that. Disability is seen as punishment for breaking the rules. That's very important because we see disabilities as a negative impact around the world, and we want to see how that goes through with everything. Looking at the Dinkaka, doctors. So the Dinkakas, what's their place in the hierarchy, their political use, their symbolism. So how are they used as a political tool? There's a whole chapter on this. And then how does this change after colonialism when modern westernized doctors come in? The implications of sorcery and medicine on social structure. So we have sorcerers coming through and how the male sorcerers are the shamans and they produce medicine, but if it's a woman, they're a witch. So how does this impact? How is this good, bad, and a combo of both? And then pay attention to the rituals involved with different stages of age, along with the belief behind it. So how children come in the world, how you leave the world, how you become a toddler, how you become an adult, how marriage and how having children is considered part of being an adult, and how this understanding of life goes into how genetic disorders work. So if you don't understand how kids are really formed and how fetuses are actually formed, will you understand how something like autism would work or something like that? Physical mastery. So men need physical mastery, and they talk about that. Why is this important to understanding disability? And then women being the main caregivers, paying attention to how they do this and why. So when people are sick, the women take care of everyone. They move them from the shade places to the other shade places, and they keep the house clean. And the sentiments of being fear of ill and disabled, and the practice of the broom. Pay attention to that, because that's how you see the cases of symbolism and illness coexisting in society. And then pay attention to these 2 questions. When looking at chapter 3, the chapters on migration, the mining systems, and how money and the physical exams all play into, so that we were talking about that with the eugenics in the intro. So what are the reasons for migrations, the impacts, and then what new diseases come from migration? So whenever you have people moving from one place to another, you have new diseases introduced. In this case, one of the diseases talked about is tuberculosis. So pay attention to that as an impact and what the repercussions are. And then we have a depression in this area in Botswana, and then we have a health system failure at the same time. So when these two come together, is one caused by the other, and what's the effect on the region and the people? Does it affect the white people or just the natives? Or is it both? So it's important to pay attention to if it's systematic, if it's planned, stuff like that. The depression itself, how did it culturally affect the people? Did it push them away from the old traditions and towards Christianity and science? Money and ableness. Where do the money, sex, and gender play in all of this? So if you're a man, can you make money and still be disabled? If you're female, if you're disabled, how your body is affected, how does that play into your social role? There's a whole, not chapter, subset about sex in this chapter, like the female body. So pay attention to how that goes into everything. Then we have a subset of this chapter on labor recruiters and young men. So at the age of 18, they come through and they recruit young men. So how does this affect the life of everyone else? If you have outward migration of all the youth, how does this affect the cultural life and the care of the adults? How do the miners and the labor workers view themselves? That's important too, because if you suddenly become injured, that mindset's still there. And then how do disabilities affect people throughout their lives, especially when medical escape changes? Can they afford to live? Stuff like that. And then we have physical exams. So when you have the colonists and the British people coming in, they're also the mine owners. And it's a deeply rooted and racist and money-schemed idea about how if they're this tall, this buff, something like this, they'll bring in more money. So what are the impacts of the studies on the people's lives? Something to pay attention to. So for chapter 5, there's some of the same questions as above, so I'm not going to go into too much detail with this. I just want you to keep in mind all the same questions we've been asking, how racism, colonialism, and cultural effects affect everything else that's happening. But we have some other key factors happening here. We have post-colonialism and the discovery of diamonds. So how the historical implications of post-colonialism are affecting this. And how did the British leave Botswana? They left it poor and damaged, but what does this do to the people? And what role does the Red Cross, NGO, and the Ministry of Health do for rehabilitation of the country? There's a whole bunch of paragraphs on this, but overall, what is the end goal of